So the Cleveland Browns just gave Case Keenum a 3-year, $18 million contract, 10 million of which is guaranteed. Definitely a pretty high price for a backup, but as far as backups go, you have to think Case Keenum is pretty much one of the best backups there is. He kind of was honestly terrible with the Rams, but he went to the Vikings, had some success there, wasn't outstanding, but was fine, and obviously they won 13 games. I believe, if I remember correctly, 12 of which were with Case Keenum as quarterback. So that was pretty crazy. But also, even when he then went over to the Washington Redskins, I thought that he had his moments and was not a mess by any means. Their team was a mess, but I thought he looked pretty good out there. And, he's kind of been one of those guys where he's either going to be a top tier backup or kind of a lower tier starter. And I do think that having that kind of guy in your team as in that backup role has a lot of value. I mean, for one thing, just you got to look at Kevin Stefanski, the Vikings' new head coach. He worked with Case Keenum back in those Minnesota days. So that's one thing. But I also think that Cleveland is clearly showing that despite last year's disappointment, they are looking to compete this year. They want to do well. They've gone out and made some, I think, really good signings in free agency. And I think this one's another one. Listen, a backup quarterback, it's not the sexiest position, but it is very important. I mean, the Saints would have been a disaster had they not had Teddy Bridgewater come in and go 5-0 as a starter. And, obviously they still went one and done in the playoffs, but they won 13 games and probably shouldn't have even had to play in Wild Card weekend. They just got kind of unlucky and then had a bad matchup in that week 1 matchup. But anyways, enough of me rambling. Let's get on to what you guys are all here for, me breaking down some film. We'll talk about this play first. It's going to be a cover 3 zone and have a receiver running that route right there. So very simple way to beat cover 3. This is something that you see happen fairly frequently. But what you're actually going to notice when the ball is snapped is what's going on the top half of the screen. It's the same thing. They're doing the same thing that I showed you earlier, but on the top half of the screen. So, obviously the idea is that as you see, there is a little gap in coverage. Keenum could try to force this one through, but he doesn't really like that. It's not a big enough gap, and he is kind of hoping that maybe on the other side of the field, the gap will get bigger. So instead, he's going to get off that read, get over to the read on the bottom half of the screen where the gap is bigger, and then he's able to make that throw. It's a tough play because, you look at that and you say, okay, that one has a 50% chance of getting complete, and then we'll say maybe like a 30% chance of incomplete and a 20% chance of an interception. Not great odds, something you don't want, but also it's better odds than just a complete nothing. And for all he knew, what was going on the other side of the field could have been a complete nothing, but he still decided to get off that first read and get over to the second read. He just sort of felt like that read would get more open. He knows the receivers that are there, he knows the defenders, and he's basically just making an educated guess. That's a lot of what a quarterback is taking these educated guesses, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes it's a bad decision, but you got to just make the best decision possible, and it kind of is like poker in a sense, where you can never guarantee you're going to win a hand unless you have a royal flush, but you know what hands have a higher percentage of winning than other hands, and you know that certain hands you should bet more, and certain hands you should bet less, depending on how good of a chance you have to win that hand, and also you got to play the people and all of that stuff, but it's a percentage-based game that really comes down to skill. Same thing with football. It's a percentage-based guessing game that comes down to skill from the quarterback position. And also, I do think that Keenum has some skill. Like, take a look at this play. It's really, I just want you to take a look at what's going on right up there, where there's going to be a deep route down the field. And I want to show that I think this is one of the things that Keenum is very good at. Where first, you see that this is actually, it's a cover 0 play, so there's a ton of pressure. But you look at Keenum, and actually, the line did a pretty good job of making sure that they're blocking, but not a great job. Keenum is going to have to step up into this throw. He will kind of have to make it off balance, which, honestly, Keenum is probably better at making throws off balance, so that's not really that big of a deal. But you look downfield, and there is an opening right here, but what should you do in this situation? Where should you throw this ball? If you answered in the middle of the field, you are correct. You want to lead him closer to the middle of the field because now you're using that inside leverage that your receiver has to your advantage, and that's what Keenum is going to do. He's going to throw it closer towards the middle of the field, so that way, it's in between the hash marks when he makes the catch. When he was way far over. But that's smart because he was already closer to the middle of the field than the Philadelphia defender. And since there's no safety deep, you could totally throw it wherever you want to throw it. Just a really smart throw by Keenum, and also a very accurate throw by Keenum. Keenum, he is kind of one of those, to compare him to another short-lived Redskins quarterback, he's kind of Alex Smith-like in a lot of ways. One other thing that I've always liked about Keenum is he is not afraid to take a chance. A lot of those sort of backup kind of guys, they just don't want to screw anything up. Keenum is totally cool with screwing something up if it means he has a chance of something very good happening. Like on this play, once again, it's going to be a one-on-one matchup. That's the route, just a deep route down the field. And after the ball is snapped, there's no way of knowing if this is going to be a completion or not. I mean, if you make this throw, even if it's a perfect throw, it could end up in an interception. Honestly, the one advantage you do have is that the Eagles' defensive back has had to turn his back, which means that you can kind of make a throw, and hopefully your receiver will have more time to turn around than the defensive back. So it is a good situation, but this definitely can result in a bad situation. However, Keenum is going to throw one up anyways. Just trust his receiver can make the catch, and that's what he does. And quite frankly, in the NFL today, there's so much good receiving talent. I think a lot of teams should do stuff like this. Don't be afraid to throw it deep, especially if you're not the best quarterback. Sometimes I would rather just a guy who's going to take a chance than a guy who isn't, quite frankly. And I do think that Keenum is that guy who is willing to take a chance. I mean, obviously, he has his negatives. I think the biggest negative is that when he does a play like that and it doesn't work out. I mean, that happens. He throws interceptions that way. It just does. But I do think that the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to Keenum, in my opinion. This plays another similar example where, again, one-on-one matchup. That's the route the receiver is going to be running. And you look at Keenum, he just takes a snap, fires one right there. Again, if that Dallas defender read that play perfectly, he could have made a break on the ball and intercepted it. But Keenum does a pretty good job of noticing when a defensive player has turned their back away, which, if I'm a head coach, I'm telling guys, hey, do your best to look at Keenum, because if you can see Keenum, you can probably intercept one or two of his passes. I mean, we saw in the Chicago Bears game, they had a lot of fun playing against Keenum for that very reason. One last good play from Keenum will be this one. It's going to be a cover one man play, and his number 2 receiver on the bottom half of the screen is running that route right there. And so this is a pretty good route. You look at it on paper, and there's going to be a cut in it, and especially with this type of cut, he still will have time to be open before he gets to the middle of the field, where there will be another Dallas player who could potentially make a play. So this is a great route against this type of coverage, and it's where Keenum is going to look to throw this ball to. And if you look, the second that he does in fact get open, because he does get open, Keenum is already in the throwing motion. It's just a perfectly timed play by Case Keenum, and that way he's able to make this throw. And it's also a very accurate throw. They get a completion, gain some yards, and quite frankly, that's what Keenum is bringing to the table. It's plays like that. He's not really the kind of guy who's too often going to make something out of nothing, but he will sometimes. And more often than not, he's the kind of guy who can just do the little things well. He's not afraid to take a chance. Again, is he a starting quarterback in the NFL? I mean, he's probably a top 32 quarterback in the NFL, but he's not someone that you would really want as a quarterback in the NFL. Unless he's a backup, which he is. I mean, let's say Cleveland starts off 6-2, and then all of a sudden Baker Mayfield goes down for 4 games. Do you trust Case Keenum to make them then go 2-2 down that stretch, and then be 8-4, and that way Baker Mayfield comes back in, and they could just go 2-2 again and try to make the playoffs that way, instead of some guys who would go 1-3 or 0-4. And now all of a sudden you're in complete catch-up mode where you pretty much have no room for failure. A good backup quarterback gives you some room for failure, and unless your quarterback is gone for the year, in which case, unless a Nick Foles situation happens, you're probably just not going to win the Super Bowl. But at the same time, teams are clearly seeing that there is tremendous value in having a good backup quarterback. It is not that infrequent that a quarterback will go down for a few games, and even if it's just for 2 games, having a guy who can win you one or both of those games, and I shouldn't even say win you, because a quarterback doesn't win you or lose you any games, but you know what I mean, put you in position where you can win, as opposed to just having some late first round draft pick that probably won't pan out, sometimes it's better to say, you know what, we'll pay the $8 million just to guarantee that we have a situation where if our quarterback goes down, we're okay. So I like this move from Cleveland. I've liked pretty much every move Cleveland has made this offseason so far, which, from last year where I wasn't a crazy fan about what they were doing, this year I love it. I think what they're doing is great, but you never know. We'll have to wait and see. So yeah, that's what I think of Case Keenum to the Browns. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.